Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lifestyle Financial Services, first webinar of 2018. We have a special guest presenter for this one, Mr. Garrick Transell, who is a partner at Energize Health Club. So he will be presenting this month's webinar on a variety of topics, focusing on psychological topics. So we'll be talking about stress, habit formation, the science behind these sort of concepts, the science of charisma, the differences between internal and external motivation. Garrick has presented on many of these things before, distilling these concepts down to nice digestible pieces that are quite understandable to the layman. So he'll be talking on all these things, and happiness, obviously important to everyone.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to chat to you today about stress and how it works. Now, normally this talk is a 60 to 90 minute talk, but being that we are a little bit time limited, let's just jump straight in and do a quick warm-up drill. So what we might do is we'll pick a few people out of our attendees, and we'll get you to unmute your microphone and you get to tell a joke in front of everybody. So let's scroll down and see who we're going to pick. All right, now before you all quickly run out of the room, we're not actually going to get anybody to unmute themselves, but I want you to do a quick body check. So for a moment, just check in with your body and start to notice your heart rate. Is it a little bit faster than it was before? Is your heartbeat maybe a little bit more shallow? And what about your blood flow? Have you noticed any changes? Is your chest feeling a little bit tight? Are you suddenly more aware of your body? Are you suddenly feeling a little bit nervous, that your palms are a little bit clammy? Maybe your throat's a bit dry. Maybe you're feeling a little bit fidgety. Maybe you just made an excuse to go to the bathroom so that you didn't have to tell a joke in front of everyone. Well, the idea with the warm-up was to set off a threat response in your body so that we can better understand how the stress mechanism works. And what you're feeling right now is adrenaline. And adrenaline basically speeds everything up. So it's one of our two major stress hormones, and it helps you to breathe faster. It increases your heart rate so you can get more blood around your body. It also helps you to think a whole lot faster, but it changes how you think slightly. And it also raises your recovery ability as well. The other hormone you're feeling is cortisol. And now cortisol is our battle hormone, because your brain thinks that if you were to get on the microphone and tell a joke, it might go horribly wrong, and suddenly you might be socially isolated. And in your brain, that experience is very similar to a battle. So what's happening right now is your attention has narrowed quite a bit. Your focus is narrowed as well. Your alertness is raised. You can say you suddenly feel like you've had a couple of shots of coffee, and your body is starting to release free energy around. So it's releasing the stored energy to help you to either run away or to fight. Now, those hormones also have an effect on your brain. It changes how we think, and it puts us into a fight or flight style thinking mode, where suddenly your inner voice is going to do everything it can to try and convince you not to be in this situation. So it either is going to make you want to run away, or it's going to make you want to fight the situation. And as I said, this is built into you. This is your fight, flight, or freeze response, which originally was laid down in our DNA back in the caveman days, which kind of makes sense, because back in caveman days, we grew up in tribes, which meant that every person we would ever know in our lives, we would grow up knowing. They would be part of our tribe. And most tribes were limited to about 50 or so people, which meant that we adapted over the decades to know that if we saw someone we didn't know, chances are they were from another tribe, which means that they were probably threatening to us, which is why our fight or flight response is so easily triggered in social situations, even if they are digital social situations like the one we just did before. Now, the first really important concept around stress is that it's an instinctual mechanism, which means there's no way that you can overcome stress. And in fact, thinking about it that way is almost guaranteed to increase your stress levels. So instead, what we're going to go through today is to teach you a few practical hacks to help you utilize this stress mechanism to motivate you, to make you think more clearly, and to be quicker on your feet. All right, so let's take a quick look into the mechanism of your fight, flight, freeze response. The two things that happen are, the first is that hormones released. Now, hormones are there to help us escape from potentially life-threatening situations, whether they're real or not. And what we did in our warm-up was a fake, potentially life-threatening situation. And what hormones do is they help us to free up resources to prioritize your blood flow, your energy, and your nervous system. On the other side of things, we have emotions. And emotions are there to help us identify and avoid potentially life-threatening situations. So when our brain engages survival thinking, it pretty much turns on this mode where it becomes very, very good at yes or no questions. Should I run? Yes or no? If it's no, should I fight? Yes or no? If it's yes, can I beat this potential foe? Yes or no? Should I freeze? Even though that's rarely a good mechanism. The problem with survival thinking is it kills all of your creativity, because before, when I said you were going to have to tell a joke, when your brain engaged that survival thinking yes or no, a yes or no question tends not to make for a very good joke. So because your brain becomes very fast at thinking, should I run, yes or no? Should I fight, yes or no? If I ask you to tell a joke and your threat response is triggered, to some extent you realize that you're not going to be very good at telling a joke, and that's why we start to panic. The problem is that we have a couple of biases built into the way that we think, and the first is the negativity bias. Now, the way the negativity bias works, it's kind of like our safety first mechanism, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes more than once. So the way it works is our brain stores memories of negative situations, painful situations, frustrating situations, far closer to the surface of our memory store and far more vividly. So what happened was, when I said, all right, we're going to tell a joke, what your brain did was it searched for similar experiences to this with a kind of a negativity twist to it, a little negativity bias. So basically, your brain tried to search for all of the times where you've mucked up a joke. And chances are those are the memories that you found first were the times when a joke went wrong. So of course, when you start to think, all right, time to tell a joke, do I know any jokes? Your brain says, hey, here's a few times when you mucked a joke up, and it tries to convince you that this is what's about to happen again. Now, again, this mechanism was designed back in the caveman days, and it was more relevant to the situation where we would see a potentially dangerous animal, say a tiger walked around the corner, so that we didn't have to think, wait, were tigers dangerous or not? Our brain had already stored the memories of dangerous animals right near the surface, so immediately I could see the tiger and decide to start running away, and hopefully it isn't quick enough to chase me down and eat me. Now, how does this relate to our modern day lives? Obviously, we're not in tribes as such anymore. We live in a society where we're constantly surrounded by people we don't know, and particularly in work environments, when we go to networking events, even when we start at a new workplace, our fight, flight, freeze response is so easily triggered that it kind of makes sense to understand how it works so that we can have some strategies to work around it. So I want you to think of a recent stressful experience, something mid-range. Now consider what was the cause, whether or not it was in fact life-threatening, and I mean in the true sense of being life-threatening. And then consider, did your stress response actually help or not? Now, for ease of experiment, I'll be the one to tell you about my recent stressful experience. The other morning, I was driving into work and I got cut off in traffic. And immediately I could feel my body starting to increase its blood flow. I got frustrated and I thought, oh, this idiot cut me off in traffic. And I could feel my heart rate going, everything, my breathing started to raise. Now, in reality, it wasn't particularly life-threatening. The guy cut me off, I got on the brakes in time, and now I'm just sitting behind another car in traffic. So in reality, the situation wasn't life-threatening. It had that feeling for a moment, but my stress response definitely didn't help because it got me frustrated. Maybe it helped me brake a little bit quicker, but the problem is that that stress response has the potential to last all day. I get frustrated, I get cut off in traffic. By the time I get to work, the first person I see at work says, hey, how are you today? And I go, oh, well, this idiot cut me off in traffic. And I relive the stressful experience. Then throughout the day, eventually I get to lunch, I see one of my colleagues I have lunch with, and they say, hey, what's going on? How's your day been? I'm like, well, it started pretty terrible. I got cut off in traffic. And I have the choice to continue reliving this stressful experience over and over and over again and turn my stress response against myself. So the question is stress harmful? Now, why don't we run a quick poll to gauge how much stress our attendees are feeling on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. So we'll pop up the poll now, and you have a couple of options to choose how much stress you experience in the day. All right, we're thinking about it a little bit. We're getting higher, almost there. Votes are coming in. All right, we're teetering. Last couple to lock theirs in. All right, so it looks like at least half of us experience some stress, moderate stress, or high stress, with no one at all saying that they experience very little stress. That being said, no one says they experience extreme stress either, which is kind of a good thing, considering that your stress response can be really useful. So it's not all without use. Now, if we go back to our slides, have we got it there? Can we see them? Perfect. Cool. Now I want you to consider whether stress is harmful, because chances are you've probably grown up on a diet believing that to be successful in life, to be healthy, to be happy, we need to be low stress. Yet a lot of research coming out suggests almost the opposite, that stress isn't necessarily harmful. The easiest way to think about it is if we zoom out and view all of the different types of stress we feel, because chances are when you think of the word stress, you're thinking of a very specific type of distress as opposed to stress as a concept. Now consider whether running a marathon tomorrow would be harmful for you, because it's no doubt that running a marathon is a physically stressful situation, a physically stressful experience. Now, chances are for some of you, running a marathon tomorrow would actually be really good for you if you've been training and working up to it and building up to be able to do the full amount. But for most people that haven't been training for a marathon, if you were to run one tomorrow, it'd be really, really bad for you. What about if we look at another type of stress? Who out there enjoys emotionally captivating, thrilling shows or movies? Think The Walking Dead, anything that has a lot of suspense in it. Even your romantic comedies that you're watching, oh, are they eventually going to hook up or not? Is this going to be the fairy tale, which it always is in the end? Now, there's no doubt that watching a horror film is an emotionally stressful experience. Yet we enjoy that experience as opposed to non-movie type real life situations. So what's the difference between them? Well, if we look at it, there are three different categories of stress, three main categories of stress. The first one is the physical stress. Now, physical stress can be lifting weights, it can be running. It also can be being hungry, being tired, being thirsty, being too hot, too much noise in the environment. All of these stimulus are physically stressful stimulus. On the other side of things, we have cognitive stress. And think of this like problem-solving stress. A really interesting recent study I read was looking at the effects of cognitive stress on our physical performance. So basically what they did was they had a whole bunch of people sit a few hours worth of maths exams to do really complicated arithmetic. And then at the end of that, they got them to do their fitness test, like a VO2 max test. And what they found was the more cognitively stressed you are, the poorer your physical performance is. Even though they've been sitting down, they were well fueled, they'd eaten, they'd drunk some tea or coffee or whatever, just doing mental arithmetic can kind of wear you out physically as well. Now, the third type of stress is probably the type that you think of when you hear stress, which is emotional stress. And emotional stress can be any sort of uncertainty, because as humans, one of our 9 fundamental needs, the Manfred Neef fundamental human needs, one of them is certainty. And if we don't have a sense of certainty, we feel pretty uncomfortable. That being said, stress is merely your body attempting to help you rise to a challenge. It's your body noticing a challenge and your body attempting to help devote more resources to meet that challenge. So it's all kind of how you look at stress. And if you're worried about stress, if you see it through darker glasses, then chances are pretty quickly you're going to become overwhelmed by the stress. But if instead we think of it from a resilience perspective, stress becomes so much more helpful. And if you think of it that stress plus recovery equals resilience, it kind of makes sense if we put it into the different contexts of stress. So if we put it into a physical context, running plus food and sleep is what allows you to get fit. If you have no stress, you take away the running, you just have food and sleep. And I think we can all agree that if we just eat and sleep, we're not going to be particularly fit. Yet in the same token, if we take away the food or sleep, we just have the stress of running. It's the equivalent of us starting to run and just not stopping, running all throughout the night. So it's pretty clear that stress needs a period of recovery in order to allow our body to adapt, to give us that stimulus to become more stress resilient. Now, again, if we put it in an emotional context, stress would be suspense, not knowing what the outcome is going to be. But eventually, if we have a resolution, that's what's entertaining to us. And that's why we love those movies. And in fact, movie directors spend a lot of time studying the intricacies of this formula so that they have the peak amount of suspense for the peak time period to eventually have some sort of gratifying resolution. And that's what's super entertaining to us. Again, if you take away the suspense and you just have resolution throughout the movie, it would be a pretty boring movie. But then again, if you took away the resolution and you just had a lot of suspense and it left you on a cliffhanger, it's like that feeling when you're at the second last episode of a series and they leave you on that cliffhanger to make sure you watch the season finale. It's kind of frustrating in the moment, right? But your brain's sort of like, okay, it's frustrating, but I kind of enjoy it because I'm really looking forward to watching next week's episode. And that's how we can approach the day-to-day stress that we feel. The last type of stress, cognitive stress, challenges plus a solution is how we make progress. And that old saying, no challenge, no change, is pretty true. That if we just have challenges, we can't solve them, we're making no progress. But if there's no challenge at all and we're just sitting in our comfortable world, then there's no reason for us to move forward, no reason for us to progress, no reason for us to innovate, to be creative, and to break new ground. Now, distress, on the other hand, is when we feel stress, we release a whole lot of adrenaline and cortisol. And the problem with both adrenaline and cortisol is that in the world of psychology, of physiology, I should say, they're a feed-forward hormone. So the more adrenaline and cortisol we release, the more we release, as opposed to a feedback one where you release some and your body judges how much you have, and then it tries to find the equilibrium. Adrenaline and cortisol make you feel anxious, they make you feel afraid, and they fill you with doubt. The problem is that when we feel anxious and afraid and full of doubt, our body releases more adrenaline and cortisol because it's trying to help us overcome this situation or to remove ourselves from the situation. Yet because most situations we're in are only theoretically dangerous, like telling a joke in front of a crowd of people you don't know, there isn't any resolution. So our brain releases more adrenaline and cortisol because it thinks, all right, well, this hasn't been enough to help. I'm going to release more and more and more. And what ends up happening is we get into a state of distress, which is based on rumination. And rumination is basically you being stressed about the fact that you're feeling stressed. And it can have the smallest little trigger. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you're like, oh, man. And then you allow yourself to feel the stress and you're like, oh, man, I might be a little bit late for work. And then you worry about that. And it just snowballs and snowballs, or it spirals is kind of the other feeling it has. Now, if you were to picture yourself about to go up on stage in front of a crowd to give a talk, chances are just a thought of that makes you feel slightly stressed. Now, when rumination kicks in, you imagine the worst case scenario of what happens when you get up on stage, and your body starts to play that out. You fill with adrenaline, you fill with cortisol, it reduces your creativity, it puts you into that survival brain mode of yes, no answers. And clearly when you're giving a presentation in front of, maybe it's just your coworkers, maybe it's a whole big crowd, being in survival brain thinking is not a particularly effective mode to be in, because again, you're very good at yes, no questions, but no good at creativity. Now, the effects of distress are really bad. While stress itself isn't bad for us, in fact, it can be quite good for us, high levels of distress can increase your risk of premature death by up to 43%, according to a study done 6 years ago, which actually ranks it in the top 10 causes of death, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Because if you were to say, what is the most likely way I'm going to die? There's, there's cancers, there's heart disease, there's car crashes, there's all the things that are in the front of our brain. But if you were to think just being stressed, not having an effective set of tools and skills and hacks to help you utilize your stress response, you wouldn't necessarily consider that a life or death situation. But the reality is that it is. It's one of the top 10 causes of premature death. The good news is that you can break the cycle, because rumination is a product of your subconscious, which is kind of a challenge, because the problem is if it's not a conscious mechanism, if it's a subconscious mechanism, it means that it's not that easy to delve into it and to summon that feeling. It's almost like your thoughts are the baggage carousel at the airport. Now, you're standing in front of the baggage carousel and you're looking for one specific piece of luggage. You're trying to focus on just one thing. What happens is a bit of luggage comes out and it's the memory of the guy that cut me off in traffic. And I'm like, oh, that guy. But I don't take the piece of luggage off the baggage carousel. I let it go round. Then another bit of luggage comes out that says, oh, don't forget, you're giving that webinar tomorrow, so you should be prepared. And you're like, oh, yes, got that. Cool. But again, I don't take it off. I just let it go around. Then I have a conversation with someone that doesn't quite feel like it was resolved. That bit of luggage comes around. Now, each piece of luggage just goes around and around. And if you don't learn how to take bits of luggage off your brain's conveyor belt, eventually they start to pile up and it becomes kind of overwhelming. And in the end, you're going to be more overwhelmed by the volume of luggage rather than the content of luggage. While each of those little individual thoughts, memories, ideas may be quite small, they might be insignificant, they might be completely inconsequential, just the fact that there are so many going around and around in your brain is going to feel quite stressful. So one of the simplest things you can do to help change your stress response is to change how you view the entire stress response. If instead of viewing stress as a bad thing, you start to view stress as a challenge, it allows your brain to utilize all of your resources to help you rise to the challenge, as opposed to utilizing just your adrenaline and cortisol, which we already know is not very effective. So now I'm going to give you 4 different stress resilience approaches. Kind of consider them like 4 hats you can try on. Now, I've given this talk to hundreds and we'd be close to thousands of people now. And it's always interesting to hear the feedback on which approach people find most successful, because it's fairly evenly spread. So I guess the point is what works for one person might not necessarily work for you. So over the next sort of 10 minutes or so, when we go through each of these, trying to consider which one fits with your own belief system, and in the end, try a couple of them and just use the one that works best for you. Now, the first one is called the scientist. And the concept is that your subconscious, your inner monologue, if you view it like it's either a completely different person or even better, like it's a chimp, it's so much easier to have a conversation with yourself. And the idea is that when you're in that survival brain mode, that survival thinking mode, the yes or no, it's already too late to try and be creative. So the only thing you can do is to try utilize curiosity to break out of that mode, because your brain can't be curious and also in survival mode at the same time. Either you're curious or you're in yes or no mode. So it's pretty simple that when you next notice your stress response kicking off, rather than fighting the stress response, instead sit, take a few breaths, and try and be curious about how the stress response is working through your body. Try and feel your heart rate increasing. Try and notice what your brain is thinking. And as soon as you get curious about how your thoughts are working, it allows you to engage a conversation and decide whether you want to continue thinking that way or choose to think differently. So right at the start, when we said, okay, it's time for everybody to tell a joke and you started to panic, if instead you sat and you gave yourself 30 seconds and you were curious about what your brain was thinking, you'd realize that you do know a few jokes and you can deliver the jokes even if they're not perfect. And in the end, the environment isn't that stressful, and at least that will help talk you off your distress pedestal. The second response is called the Storyteller. And this is kind of based on that emotional distress mechanism where uncertainty is kind of the main problem we face. Because making a decision is really hard, what we could do is be better at making decisions, or we could remove ourselves from the situation where we need to make decisions. Now, for most people, we can't remove ourselves from the situation to make a decision. So the better bet is to learn to make decisions more effectively. Now, the quote up on your screen from Abraham Hicks is one I will often remind myself of, or my team as well. And it's that make a decision and then make your decision right. Line up your energy with it. In most cases, it doesn't really matter what you decide, just decide. There are endless options that would serve you enormously well, and all or any of them is better than no decision. And this kind of sums up the concept that many of the stressful experiences we have are decision fatigue stress, where we feel like we have a really important decision that we need to make, whether it is life-threatening or not. It takes on that sort of feeling in our body. And at some point, we're weighing it up, we're doing the pros and cons list, which way should I go? But eventually it gets to the point where we're not taking on any new information. So we've got all the information, the pros for one side, the pros for the other side, the cons for one side, the cons for the other side. If there's no clear winner, our brain thinks, all right, well, if I keep mulling over this, there eventually will be a clear winner. Yet, if there isn't an immediate clear winner, chances are there isn't going to be one, because we're not taking on any new information. We're just resorting the old information, and we're essentially putting each of the pros and each of the cons on either side into suitcases and letting them go around our baggage carousel over and over again. Yet instead, if we hear this story in our brain, and we remind ourselves that simply creating a resolution is often as useful as finding one. Instead, we can look at that situation and say, all right, well, if I've been thinking about this for a couple of days and I'm not taking on any new information, rather than that be really stressful because there isn't a resolution, if anything, that's really comforting, because it means that it doesn't really matter which way I go, because if both options are so evenly matched that I can't choose between them, that means both of them are probably going to be a fairly good outcome. In that case, make the decision and afterwards line up your energy with it. And that's far less hippie than it sounds. It means get behind your decision and just accept that that's a decision I've made, and now I can't change the decision. All I can do is try and make the decision right. So I can line up my energy with it, I can be positive about it, and I can do whatever I can do to make it the right decision. Now, the third hat we can put on is the monk hat. Now, mindfulness is a really interesting concept. It's one of those popular words that's floating around, which is quite different from meditation. Now, the simple way to think of the difference between mindfulness and meditation is like training in the gym versus playing a sport. Now, most athletes these days spend a lot of time in the gym. Think of it like, say, velodrome cyclists. They spend at least half of their time in the gym, not on the bicycle. So when they're in the gym, it's the equivalent of them meditating, which is practicing the skill of being powerful in the legs. The more that they practice their meditation, their weightlifting, the better they are in the real life situation where they need to be mindful and need to be able to use those skills that they've developed. Now, meditation isn't that mystical. It's not about sitting there and clearing your thoughts. It's not even necessarily about repeating a mantra, magic words that change anything. My experiences of meditation have been through, it's called Vipassana meditation, which is basically just a single point of focus meditation, and the single point you focus on is your breath. And the way to think about it is when you're sitting and focusing on your breath, you're constantly being challenged by needs for your attention. And because attention is a limited resource, we're constantly being pulled by our subconscious for all these different thoughts that are flying around. And the point of bringing your attention back to your breath, focusing on your breath, is to learn the skill of you consciously choosing where your attention is, because I can either be in the conversation with my colleague or I can be inside the monologue in my own head. We're really bad at having two conversations at once. So it teaches me the skill to be able to turn off the monologue in my head, to press mute for a little while, and actually to be engaged in the conversation, or to be present at your daughter's dance recital, or to really enjoy the beach you're at. One of the most interesting examples of this was, I forget who the person was, but I was listening to a podcast months ago, which was all about eating a peach. And it was kind of funny because the podcaster was telling this story about the time where he was eating a peach and he found himself thinking about the best peach he'd ever eaten. And the whole time he was thinking about this mythical peach of the perfect peach, he didn't realize that he'd finished his own peach. And his thought processes meant that he couldn't even enjoy the current peach. And to him, that became his mantra, which I know a few people have taken on, that this is the peach right now, that whatever moment you're experiencing right now, you get to experience it, or you can just let it drift by being lost in thoughts instead. Now, meditation and mindfulness can be quite easy to start. It's far simpler than you think. To meditate, it's as simple as sitting and trying to focus your attention on feeling the breath going across your upper lip. So if you sit, and you can even try a few now, sit really comfortably, close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to take a few breaths and just try and feel the sensation of the breath going across your upper lip into your nose and out of your nose. Now, what you'll find is that it's really hard to focus on me speaking and that at the same time. Now, if I were to stop speaking and you were to try that a little bit longer, what you'd find is you'd probably only get 3 or 4 breaths before your mind started to wander and you started to think about something that's coming up later today, or start to think about that awesome webinar you listened to this morning. And in any case, it's really hard to focus on the sensation you're trying to focus on. But that's okay. That's completely normal because everybody has a starting point. The idea is that if you practice that on a regular basis, eventually, like working out in the gym, your muscles get stronger, including the muscle, which is your focus, your ability to shift your attention. So while it may only start with 2 to 3 breaths, eventually you'll get to the point where through choice, you can bring your attention back to the conversation you're in, back to the daughter's dance recital, back to the moment you're experiencing that delicious peach you're eating. And if you have that skill, that ability, it means that when you notice your stress response kicking off, you can start to shift things a little bit. You can start to shift the way that your body experiences stress. So rather than feeling your heart rate increasing and worrying about it, instead, if you picture increased blood flow to your extremities, because that's what your body's trying to achieve. If you were to picture your thoughts suddenly speeding up, rather than thinking, I'm getting overwhelmed and I'm going to muck this up, instead, if you picture that your brain is kind of clicked up a notch, it's like you've just had a shot of coffee and it's going to help you think more efficiently and think a whole lot quicker. So for people that know how to utilize a stress response, it actually can make you more creative. It can make you quicker on your feet. It can make you funnier. It can make you more intelligent. But first, you kind of need to learn the skill to be able to turn that on. Now, if you want a simple way to learn meditation and intro to mindfulness, I'd recommend the Headspace app. It's really simple. You can do like a 10-day intro for free, I'm pretty sure. And they're just 10-minute little blocks. It's the most basic way to learn to meditate. And again, if this is one of the hats that's useful to you, then it could change the sort of trajectory of how you utilize stress moving forward. But now we save the best for last. The most effective hat you can use is the friend hat. And the idea is that you can rewire your entire stress response by reaching out every single time you feel stressed. Now, the picture up on your screen is a picture of your brain, or the neurons, how it actually looks on the inside. And what happens is when we experience a stress response, our brain sends a signal down a very specific pathway to tell us, I'm feeling stressed, this is terrible. Now, the more often we go down that pathway, the easier it is for us to go down that pathway. A really quick example, I'll get you to put your arms down by your side. Now I want you to fold your arms quick as you can. Cool, now put your arms back down by your side. Now fold them the other way as quick as you can. Yeah. So what's likely to happen is you're going to do a few little like cha-chas that's going to sort of look like a dance. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold your arms the normal way and then go over and over and over again. And what we've just demonstrated is how the habit mechanism works. So that's a physical habit where your brain has taught itself that you fold your arms the same way every single time. So what it's done is create a quick shortcut so that it doesn't take brain resources to think, all right, I've got to bend my elbow, I've got to tuck my hand in, I've got to make a fist. Instead, you just fold your arms. Now, the same happens with your stress response, that every time you feel stress, your brain's like, okay, quick, what happens when I feel stress? I panic, I muck things up, that's what's going to happen again. So you don't really need to think about it. But if instead you teach your brain a new response, which is every time I feel stressed, I discuss it with somebody, and inevitably it ends with me getting support from a friend. And now it doesn't even have to be that hard. You don't even have to ask for help. All you need to do is voice your experience of stress. So I can call up my buddy Dan and say, hey buddy, you just had a really stressful day. And he's like, oh really, what happened? I'm like, oh, this guy cut me off in traffic and then stuff at work wasn't really going that smooth and it's kind of frustrating. He's like, oh man, that sucks. You all right? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. Just that little interaction is me rewiring my response, because he's like, all right, well, do you want to go get a beer? Do you want to hang out? I'm like, yeah, that'd be good. What I've just done is I've taught my brain that experiencing stress inevitably ends in having a beer with Dan, which is a pretty cool experience, right? Now, the thing is, if you do that every single time, eventually that becomes the default habit pattern. That becomes the default way that you experience stress. So when you feel that initial input of challenge that your body recognizes, your brain's like, it fast forwards to this is going to end up with support. The same happens when you get up on stage public speaking. For most people, that is the most terrifying thing you can do. But for someone like myself who does that for a living, I utilize this response so often. So when I'm about to get up on stage, it's not that I don't experience a stress response, it's that I know how to utilize it. As soon as I start to feel that, I instead use some curiosity, I get mindful, and I kind of combine all of these 4 hats, and I try to imagine which part of the talk people are going to enjoy the most, which joke they're going to find the funniest. And in my brain, that becomes a reality, and I start to look forward to getting to specific parts of the talk. And again, this is just a skill that you can practice. So try, first off, every time you feel stressed, just reach out, just tell someone, oh man, I'm feeling stressed. And start to notice what response happens and how your brain psychology starts to change automatically. And from a chemical perspective, it's sort of like the distress formula we looked at before, where stress equals adrenaline and cortisol, and we have our anxiety, fear, and doubt. What happens from a chemicals perspective is we add 2 extra hormones either side of adrenaline and cortisol. We add dopamine and oxytocin, and these are connection hormones. Interestingly enough, in our brain, when we experience dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol, and oxytocin together, we don't feel anxiety, stress, or fear. We feel anticipation, excitement, and suspense. We get to be in that movie scenario. We get to be at the top of the roller coaster, those experiences that we enjoy, simply by having a conversation about it. It sounds so simple, but it's one of the most effective things you can do. Now, I know we're coming up towards the end. So before we do a quick question and answer, a few final thoughts. And the first thing I'd like you to take away from today is that stress is a really powerful asset. It can be used to make you more creative. It can be used to help you connect with friends. And it also can motivate you just to change whatever your situation is, which can be a really good thing. The second thought is that resilience itself is a skill, which means it takes a little while to practice it. So the first time you practice any of these, you can expect to not be very good at them. It'd be like picking up a golf club and the first time being frustrated that you didn't just nail one straight onto the green. But like golf, if you practice over and over and over again, eventually your skills will improve. And the same goes for resilience, that sit with it, just notice your stress response, try a few different things, try a few of those different hats on, and see which one fits best for you. And the fourth is to invest that time in relationships. Every time you feel stress, if you bring it to your friends, your partner, even your work colleagues, it helps to build stronger bonds. And it also teaches your brain that stress ultimately leads to support. Now, before we take some quick question and answer, if you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Having a unique name like my own means it's very easy to find me. There is only one of me. I post some articles and do some little talks, so feel free to reach out and connect. And you can also find links to my website there, where I've got a bunch of stuff, including some of the talks I do for conferences and in the corporate setting. Should we do some question and answer?
Great, thanks very much, Garrick. That was really interesting. Very surprising to me to find out that I'm so bad at crossing my arms the wrong way as well. So guys, if you could just send through any questions that you have, we'll keep this webinar open for sort of 5 or 10 minutes as the questions come through. Just use the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen on that dashboard, and Garrick will answer them as they come through. If you don't have any questions, feel free to log out. Thank you very much for joining us. As Garrick said, you can get in touch with him via LinkedIn, or if you want to get in touch with Lifestyle Financial Services, who have worked with Garrick to put on this webinar, you can get to us at contact@yourlifestyle.com.au or yourlifestyle.com.au for our website if you want to find out anything else about what we do, or get in touch with Garrick through us. So as I mentioned, just jump on the questions panel on the right-hand side, and we will keep the webinar open in the meantime.
All right, so we've had a question about the whole concept of rewiring your brain being a really difficult thing to do. So I guess in the moment of stressful experiences, you can kind of view it like immediate diffusers, like things I can do right now, which tend to be more useful for anxious situations, because again, stress, we use it as like a catch-all term for almost everything, as opposed to differentiating between stress and anxiety, because those things are quite different. So if it's more anxiety that we're talking about, like what do I do in the moment when I feel anxiety? The simplest analogy is sand, which is first to stop, because it's a thing you can remember easily, to stop whatever I'm doing, whether it's I'm thinking, I'm sitting in my computer, whatever I'm doing. The first A is to acknowledge that this is an experience of stress or anxiety. The second A, because there's two A's in sand, is to acknowledge that this experience isn't unique at all, that I've had this experience before, and that many other people have had this experience before. The N is to then normalize and to say, okay, this is part of the human experience, and my brain is just trying to help me. So I just normalize the whole thing, that I challenge that thought that this is a catastrophe. And instead, if I can diffuse the catastrophe by saying, this is a normal experience. Sure, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, but this will pass without me doing anything different. I don't necessarily need to overcome stress. I don't need to overcome anxiety, because neither stress or anxiety works that way. They are things that we overcome. They're emotions that we experience, all of which pass eventually. And the final one, the D in sand, is to discuss it. So I think you can kind of utilize that whole rewiring your brain response by putting, sand in front of the discuss, to think, all right, first, if I stop, I get my thoughts under control. I acknowledge that I'm experiencing stress. I accept that it's a normal experience to have. I normalize it, so I decatastrophize, and then I discuss. Kind of in one foul swoop, you've helped to manage an in-the-moment experience of stress, and you've helped to rewire your stress response, kind of all in one go. So hopefully that helps.
All right, thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar. We are going to wrap that up now. As usual, we'll make the recording available on our website, www.yourlifestyle.com.au, and send it out in our newsletter. So if you aren't getting our monthly newsletter, just get in touch. You can just jump on our website to get our contact details, and we'll make this recording available to all of you. And I'm sure Garrick will be interested in sharing it out on his own channels as well, such as LinkedIn, as he mentioned before. So thanks again for coming along. Have a great afternoon.